So we had a short break last week due to the FA Cup fourth round, but I'm pleased to say the Premier League is back this weekend for game week 25. Now Everton and Liverpool have all caught up, and there's some massive fixtures coming up this weekend. This is the prediction show where we take a look ahead at all of them, all the main talking points, all the stories surrounding them, and we give our predictions as well. And for what it's worth, actually, on that point, I got some stick last week, and probably deservingly so. I think I got 9 incorrect scores, 9 incorrect results out of 10 last game week, so not good enough, got to do better. And funnily enough, given the name of this channel, it was my dad who was my harshest critic. So I've set him a challenge, I've set him a task. Now on every video, when I do my predictions, he's going to do his as well. So here's the 10 games this weekend, and you'll see my predictions and my old man's too. Let's get stuck in. So first up is the Friday night game. It's Brighton against Chelsea at the Amex Stadium, which is effectively a repeat of the FA Cup game last week, which Brighton won 2-1. Now, both of these teams come into this one in quite patchy form. They've both lost 2 out of their last 3 games. Both a bit hit and miss this season. I mean, Chelsea still ultimately sit in 4th place. They'll be happy enough with that. But it's a really big game for Brighton too. You know, through the FA Cup against Chelsea, it does feel like the FA Cup is maybe the last real chance of success for Brighton this season. They're sort of 6 or 7 points off the pace in the European places, which maybe they would have hoped to challenge for in the early part of this season, but I think they're going to struggle to do it via the league. They've got a very good chance. They've certainly got a fighter's chance in the FA Cup, especially with so many big teams dropping out of it now. And it's a really tough place to go, the Amex. So I think Chelsea will struggle again in this one. I actually saw a really interesting stat ahead of this one that said that Brighton haven't won at home in the Premier League in 5 games, and Chelsea haven't won away in the Premier League in 5 games. So the smart money is probably on the draw in this one. I think the really big thing in this round of fixtures, for Chelsea anyway, is that the 2 teams who are hot on their tail, City and Newcastle, play each other this game week at the Etihad. So it's a really, really important game, I would say, for Chelsea not to lose, because one of them is going to drop points, or maybe both, who knows. I can't see past a draw. I think Brighton they'll take their form, they'll take the FA Cup results into this one and the confidence they've got from that. And I think it's going to be, there's always goals with Chelsea, isn't there? They're always likely to concede. I'm going to go 2-2. Desmond. I'm going to go for a Friday night goal fest. 2-2. And funnily enough, my dad believes it's going to be a Chelsea away win. So he's gone 2-1 Chelsea. So I'll put that up there and we'll see how he gets on. Next up is the early kickoff on Saturday. Leicester City against Arsenal at the Walker Stadium. Now, before the news came out this week about Kai Havertz, I think I would have gone for an Arsenal win in this one. I think that news will have hit Arsenal fans, Arsenal players, Mikel Arteta, everyone around the club really, really hard. And how they react to that news will be really telling. You know, they could come out and blow Leicester away. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in this one, to be honest, because I think if they come out and they struggle, which, by the way, Leicester have played very, very well in recent games. Maybe not so much at Everton. They started incredibly slow. They played very well away at Spurs. I thought they were really unlucky at Old Trafford. Again, I know Spurs and Man United, 2 teams who are in a little bit of disarray themselves. Arsenal, obviously, a different kettle of fish to those 2. But I do think that Leicester can cause them problems and can frustrate and be stubborn. I would have gone for an Arsenal win every day of the week and 5 times on Sunday before that Kai Havertz news. To lose Havertz is a massive, massive blow. He covers so much ground for Arsenal. He's so critically important to Mikel Arteta's system and how they play, how they press from the front. It's a big, big loss. It is beyond just goals and a focal point in attack. But without Kai Havertz, they're really stuck now. They've got Trossard, Sterling and Wanyeri. That's their front 3. That's the only front 3 they can reasonably play, unless they try to convert someone else into a centre-forward. I mean, there's been talk about Mikel Merino being used up there. They could potentially push one of the wingers forward. Sterling has at times drifted into a centre-forward position in his career, but it's not Kai Havertz. It's not a proper centre-forward. It's a patch-up job, and you can't keep pace in a Premier League title race with a patch-up attack. It's the most critically important part of the team, arguably, at this stage of the season. You know, getting goals, eking out those 1-0 wins. I think these games, Leicester away, these are the games where Arsenal are going to struggle the most without their recognised attack. They've already dropped points in a lot of games this season. Don't forget, 24 games played, Arsenal have dropped points in 10 of them. That's not Premier League title winning form even before all these injuries, but with them, it's going to make things an awful lot worse. And part of me suspects they might even start to be dragged back into that top 4 battle. Could be wrong, but I just think the number of teams that are in that race, Chelsea, City, Newcastle, Forest, of course, hot on Arsenal's tail, and they're just relentless. They're not giving it up. And that's also not including the Villas and even the Bournemouths below those teams, who are also, playing with real consistency. And the gap between them and Arsenal really isn't all that big. It's certainly not insurmountable with 14 games left of the season, especially when you consider all of those players are pretty much out for the season now, apart from Martinelli. Saka may come back for the last handful of games in the season, but Jesus is out, Havertz is out. That's the bulk of their attack, isn't it? It's really unlucky from Mikel Arteta, but it's also really foolish, and I sense Arsenal fans' frustration on this one because they've not succession planned, they've not prepared for this one. They knew there was a shortage in attack, and it's what they've been bleating about online for, feels like at least a year, if not longer. They need a centre-forward. They were so close to getting Ollie Watkins this window. Didn't happen. Didn't want to pay the extra cash. I bet they'd wish they got him now. But look, we can talk about Arsenal's problems till the cows come home. Leicester. We need to talk about Leicester. Leicester have 1 win and 9 defeats in their last 10 Premier League games. They are about as certain as you can get in terms of Premier League relegation. I feel like they look very much a Championship side. And everything tells me that Arsenal are going to beat them. However, the early kickoff rule still applies. I still think, even though I fell foul in the last set of predictions, that there's always a surprise result with those early Saturday kickoffs. Always. Nearly always. I can't get past that. I know it might be silly, and I might look foolish, that's fine. I'm going to go for Leicester to get a point in this one. Anything other than an Arsenal win would be headline news for the rest of the day. It would be the biggest result of the weekend, and I firmly expect Arsenal will get the win, but I'm going to go for a Leicester point, and I think they go ahead, so I'm going to go 1-1. Leicester 1, Arsenal 1, Leicester taking the lead, just as they did at Old Trafford, just as they did at Spurs. Maybe Ruud van Nistelrooy can eke something out in this one. I'm going to go for 1-1. Unsurprisingly, though, my old man who's told me about the early kickoff rule has gone for 3-0 Arsenal, so great. So now on to the Saturday 3pm kickoffs, and first up is Aston Villa against Ipswich Town at Villa Park, and on paper at least, this one feels a little bit more straightforward to call. I thought Villa played quite well against Spurs in the FA Cup. They weren't fantastic, don't get me wrong, but they were better. They have been a little bit disjointed, a bit patchy recently, and maybe a little bit of that was due to the noise around the January transfer window. Obviously, John Duran leaving, there was sort of murmurs of discontent behind the scenes with him, wasn't there? Obviously, Ollie Watkins, rumours about him wanting to go to Arsenal. And then they finished the January transfer window really strong by bringing in the likes of Marcus Rashford and Marcus Asensio. Him coming in, and I thought Asensio looked great against Spurs, Rashford too, and that'll give him a real boost in attack. And obviously Morgan Rogers, Jacob Ramsey now looking bang in form as well. And it was good to see Villa kick on, because I do think Villa are a prime candidate for those Champions League positions this season. Certainly if we do get a 5th position, there's a real fight on for them to get back in the Champions League next season. It'd be good to see him in it. I think Villa are a really big club. I really like Unai Emery. I like the style of football that they play, and it'd be good to see him back in Europe, back in the big time again next season. But their form has been a little bit all over the place. Going back to the 2-2 at the Emirates, funnily enough, when they were losing 2-0 to Arsenal, came back and got the point. Since then, they've lost 2, won 2, and drawn the other. So they have been a little bit all over the place, and it's difficult to know what you're going to get from Villa this season. It'd probably be a little bit unfair of me to label Aston Villa a cup team just yet, but they certainly have a hangover after their appearances in cup competitions. I think I actually said prior to the Wolves defeat last week that they had one win in their last 7 games after a European game, and then they go and get beat away at Molineux. That would point to maybe Ipswich getting a result here, and Ipswich actually have been okay on the road. They've done well at Spurs, famously. Obviously, they did well against Fulham at Craven Cottage. That's a tough place to go. And I think Ipswich will cause Villa problems, but I still fancy Villa to get the job done in the end. Villa really need to be beating Ipswich if they've got any hope of getting in the Champions League next season. They need to start clawing back that gap on City, Newcastle, Chelsea. They really need to start getting in and amongst that and making it much tighter. And I should point out as well that Ipswich were very impressive themselves in the FA Cup this weekend. You know, a big 4-1 win away at Coventry. Not an easy place to go, especially in the form that they're in under Frank Lampard. But that might just be their level. You know, they've lost their last 4 Premier League games on the spin. That Southampton defeat at home was really, really big, really important, and they're going to have to start picking up points soon, Ipswich, if they're going to claw themselves out of this, and I don't think that's going to happen this weekend, sadly. But we've both gone for big Aston Villa wins in this one, so I've gone for Aston Villa 4, Ipswich Town 0. Let me know in the comments what you think. So next up, another fixture that could go either way. Fulham against Nottingham Forest at Craven Cottage. It's basically a flip of a coin, this one, isn't it? I mean, Nottingham Forest have 4 defeats in their last 5 away games. The only blot on that record being the 5-0 away at Bournemouth not that long ago. Fulham have 1 defeat in their last 7 home games at Craven Cottage. Craven Cottage, a notoriously difficult place to go. And the only defeat they got there was their last game there, which was against Man United. That late deflected Lisandro Martinez shot. And, you know, they were unlucky to lose that one. So, I mean, take your pick. I think Fulham are right just on the edge of falling away from those European places. They've had a very, very good season. Marco Silva's done very well. They'll be disappointed that they haven't made the big results that they've got, you know, away at Stamford Bridge and, you know, getting a point at home to Arsenal. They've done some really, really big performances in big games and then just let themselves down against the likes of Southampton and Ipswich and Wolves, teams that they really should be beating and picking up points against, especially if they're going to be fighting for Europe. But it feels to me, I could be wrong, but it feels to me like they need to get a result in this one if they are to stay in the hunt for those European places. They got a big result at St James's Park. That was a shock. No one expected that. And, you know, it's brought them right back into the conversation as far as I'm concerned. For Forest, look, I mean, with Arsenal losing Kai Havertz and, you know, Arsenal's attack dropping like flies, they've actually got a really good chance of pushing on, looking up the league, looking up and maybe getting second. Champions League now has to be it's a must for Forest. I think we've reached that tipping point that I talked about only a few videos ago, it feels like, where we were talking about there coming a tipping point in the season for Forest where it goes from, are they gonna get Champions League football to actually they now need to get Champions League football. They've played that well for that long now. I know there's 14 games left. It's still a really, really big, you know, it's a long way to go. I understand all that. But it feels the way that the season's gone, the way the season's going. City, Newcastle, you know, Villa not quite at the races. Arsenal losing big players and they're not quite at the races. Forest will never, ever, ever have a better chance of Champions League football than they do right now. They've got themselves in an amazing position. You know, they bounced back last week against Brighton very impressively. Really big victory, that one, at the City Ground, after myself and many others predicted that, you know, maybe the Bournemouth hammering, and it was a hammering, maybe that could have knocked them a little bit. Maybe that knocks their confidence, and it really didn't. You know, they came out and they blew Brighton away. They were fantastic, and if Forest carry on like this, there's absolutely no reason why they can't be playing Champions League football next season. So I think that I'm going to sit on the fence. I'm going to have to. I cannot see them getting a win at Craven Cottage. It's such a difficult one to call, this one, because it really could go either way. I think that's what we're going to go for. I'm going to go for 1-1. I'm going to go for a much closer game than the Brighton result was last week. I'm going to go Fulham 1, Nottingham Forest 1. Let me know what you think. And next up, probably the game of the game week, Manchester City against Newcastle. Odd that this is a 3 o'clock kickoff on Saturday, but a huge game at the Etihad, 5th against 6th. And this is a really big game, isn't it? For a number of reasons. There's a lot riding on this, because Manchester City and Newcastle really have probably not performed as well as they'd hoped this season, for different reasons. I think Man City, they're not quite the side that they were over the last 6-7 years. We saw that again in midweek against Real Madrid, that crumble. Another game where City have led and just thrown it away. I saw a stat this weekend that said Manchester City have conceded more goals in the opening 10 minutes of games than any other Premier League side other than West Ham. And that's astonishing. That is a really big stat when you consider where Manchester City were at the start of this season and what everyone expected them to do and be challenging on all fronts again. And even though they've still been the 5th best side in the Premier League so far, they look so short on confidence, and that's the biggest surprise to me. And I suspect Newcastle will start fast in this one and get an early goal. That's what I'm backing. I think Newcastle will get an early goal in this one, and I think they'll spring a shock. So I'm going for Manchester City 1, Newcastle 2. Again, it's one of those games that could go either way. My dad sat on the fence, he's gone for 2-2. So I think it could be a really close one. But I think Newcastle can get this one over the line. I really do. I think they've just got that edge in attack, and they'll bounce back. I think from last week against Fulham, they'll bounce back straight away and get straight back to it. They were great against Arsenal in the League Cup. And yeah, I think I'm going to go for 2-1 Newcastle. Let me know what you think. So next up, another 3 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. It's the Battle of the South Coast, Southampton against Bournemouth. And this one's going to be a really interesting one to look forward to, because there is a world where Bournemouth finish the game week in 4th place. I mean, they need a couple of results to go their way elsewhere. Manchester City and Newcastle drawing, and Brighton to beat Chelsea again, as they did in the FA Cup. If that were to happen, and Bournemouth were to beat Southampton, Bournemouth could find themselves in 4th spot on goal difference. And I suspect that might just be how it plays out. I really like Bournemouth. I think they'll come into this with real confidence. Southampton too, for what it's worth. I mean, look, they're not in the strongest position, but they got a fantastic win away at one of their relegation rivals, Ipswich, last time out. A late winner as well. Look, they're 10 points from safety with 14 games left. It's effectively 11 points as well if you look at the goal difference that they've got to claw back on Wolves and various others around them. So there's coming a time, maybe it's not just yet, but there's coming a time where Southampton are just turning up for the show, really. They're not here to fight for their Premier League future anymore, and I don't know if we've quite reached that stage yet. I think Southampton fans will still harbour some hope, but they're going to have to start picking up some big results, some real surprise results. And winning away at Ipswich is a good result for Southampton, but it was necessary. And I think a point in this one, minimum, is necessary. Truth be told, I think even they're going to have to start picking up wins, because 3 points can change so much down the bottom. And if they got back-to-back wins, that would just bring a little bit more confidence to the team as well. I think Ivan Juric has made an impression on that Southampton team. He has changed how they're playing. He has given them a little bit more confidence. Even going back to some of the bad results that they've had under him, I think they've still played better. I remember the Palace game. I remember the Old Trafford game, which we've talked about a few times. I think Southampton are a better football inside now than they were in the first half of the season. But I still fancy Bournemouth get the job done here. So I'm gonna go for a convincing Bournemouth win with Southampton nicking one. So I'm gonna go Southampton 1, Bournemouth 3. And I think that might just be the final nail in the coffin for Southampton. Maybe not mathematically just yet, but I think a defeat here and heads probably drop. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think that's Southampton pretty much done and dusted for the Premier League this season? Do you think that even before this game? Let me know. On to the final 3 o'clock game on Saturday, and it's West Ham against Brentford from the London Stadium. And this one's a bit of a nothing game, isn't it? Both sides are out of both cup competitions. They're just languishing in mid-table. Not really in any danger of going down, but equally not really any chance of attacking those European places further up the league. And yeah, they're just kind of in Premier League purgatory. And both managers probably have one eye on the summer as well. Probably looking for new signings that can come in and freshen up the squad and maybe even retain the top players they already have. You know, West Ham have some very good players, Kudus in particular, Paquetá, Bowen, you know, all players that have been linked with moves away. And then you look at Brentford, Wissa was strongly linked with moves away in January, Brian and Burmo too. And it's whether or not the clubs are going to show the ambition, one, to keep hold of those players, but also to really invest in the squad and help those teams kick on, because it does feel like both clubs are at a tipping point where they could maybe kick on and reach those European places. There's some really good young players at the clubs, and they've both got bright young managers, haven't they, really? Thomas Frank and Graham Potter, both very, very accomplished and, could definitely take those clubs on to European football again. But yeah, it's whether or not the clubs are going to give him that resource to do so. And I think Thomas Frank in particular could be teased away from Brentford with a brighter project elsewhere, maybe. And maybe some of his players will too. So it will be a very, very interesting summer for both of these teams. And I think this one's just going to be very much about playing for pride, putting on a show in front of the fans, and maybe one or two of those players putting themselves in the shop window. So yeah, I think West Ham will take this one. Brentford's away record hasn't been terrific this season. That's been well documented, and I think West Ham will get this done. So I'm going to go for the same as my dad. West Ham 2, Brentford 1. Let me know what you think. On to the 5:30 kickoff on Saturday, Crystal Palace against Everton from Selhurst Park, and Everton will understandably be buzzing after that last-minute Tarkowski stunner in midweek. I feel like I'm having to kind of internally reassess Everton now under David Moyes, because they're producing more fight and better football, actually, than I had given them credit for earlier in the season under Sean Dyche. And look, I was one of the ones who was saying, look, Sean Dyche has done a terrific job at Everton and he deserves more time, and I can't believe these Evertonians are not giving him the time of day and all that sort of stuff. And actually, since Moyes has come in, not only have they looked a better and more cohesive attacking unit, defensively they're still as robust as they were under Dyche, I thought they played really well against Liverpool in midweek. I didn't think Liverpool were terrific, don't get me wrong, and I still think Liverpool were hard done by, but actually, on reflection, after the emotions have settled and all that sort of stuff, I do think Everton were full value for the point at the end of the day. And I think Palace are still going to provide them with a tough test in this one. Palace are, 1 defeat in 9? And look, both sides have got very little to fight for in the remainder of this season. I think, similar to West Ham and Brentford in the last game, really, it's a bit of a nothing game. It'll be an interesting one to watch, because I think both sides have got maybe a point to prove, but there's not really a lot that they're fighting for. Everton, I think they're safe now. And Palace have been safe for some time, but neither side are going to move up the table in any significant way. I think Everton are just going to look to finish the season strongly before they move into the new stadium and a bright new chapter for them. Palace, they're going to have one eye on the summer and trying to strengthen and freshen up, that squad, and maybe they could move up the table, because they've got the bones of a very good team there with Gay, Lacroix. I think Mateta's very underrated. We all know how good Eze is. I think Wharton is tremendous. If he's fit and he's playing regularly, which he hasn't been for some time, I'd love him at Liverpool. I think he's a very, very good player, very talented young player. So this has all the makings of a good game. The late kick-off on a Saturday evening. So I'm struggling on this one, but I think I'm going to go for a draw. I'm so tempted to go for a Palace win, but I'm going to sit on the fence, I think, because Everton had showed an awful lot more than I thought they were capable of in that Liverpool game. Both goals were, unfortunately, of a very high quality. I would probably have been tempted to go for a Palace win in this one, and it wouldn't surprise me if that happened, because they've got a great record at Selhurst Park. But I'm going to go for a draw. I'm going to go Palace 1, Everton 1. My old man thinks Palace are going to win. That might just be the Liverpool fan in him. Let me know what you think. On to Sunday's games, and first up is Liverpool against Wolves at Anfield. Wolves have been very impressive under Vitor Pereira, and if you've watched this channel at all in recent weeks, any of my predictions videos, you'll have seen that I have been praising Wolves non-stop, even while they've been getting beat. I think they've been very, very good in how they've set up. Very bold, quite aggressive, maybe a touch naive, but still, I think Wolves are safe. I know they're on the cusp of the relegation zone, but I still think they've got enough to be safe this season. I really like how Cunha is playing. I think that the guy who's come in at the back, Agbadou, has been very, very impressive in the few games that he's played. He's added a little bit more resilience and organisation to the back for Wolves. A bit more pace as well, so they can push up a touch higher. I don't want to say Liverpool are going to come out and smash Wolves and put 4 past them. I don't think it's going to be that game. I do think Liverpool are going to have a massive point to prove, though, after that Everton game. No Arne Slot on the touchline for this one, although potentially he might be. I think if there's an appeal that goes in, then he might miss only the Villa game, or maybe the Villa game and the City game thereafter. I guess it depends on what the Premier League view what he did, because apart, from what I saw, all he did was walk onto the pitch and shake Michael Oliver's hand. He may have done so quite sarcastically, but it didn't really look like he did an awful lot wrong, or certainly no more than others have done in the past. To me, it seems, unless he said something massively out of turn, and I guess we'll have to wait for the referee's report on that, I can't really see why Slot shouldn't be on the touchline for this one, but hey, there you go. I think that Liverpool will win this one, though. I think Liverpool will win this one. I don't want to say comfortably. I don't think it's going to be comfortable. But I think Liverpool will win by more than 1. So, I think it'll be an interesting game. It's one that Liverpool have to win. Arsenal playing Leicester in the early kick-off could potentially put pressure on Liverpool. If Arsenal have got the win there, it reduces the gap down to just 4 points. And all of a sudden then, that does become something that could be overturned. If Arsenal have dropped points against Leicester, as I have predicted that they might, then Liverpool all of a sudden might just feel like the pressure's off. And look, not for 1 second am I suggesting that Wolves are going to be a walkover here. I think they've got more than just a point to prove. They're playing for their Premier League future, right? Their status as a Premier League club is on the line. I thought they were alright when they went away to Stamford Bridge, but ultimately they lost again. All 3 goals from set pieces as well, weren't they? And it was all a bit scrappy and a bit bobbly, but they played really well on the counter-attack and they hurt Chelsea. And I suspect they'll play in a very similar way against Liverpool, and it's whether or not Cunha and, maybe Bellegarde, running from deep can cause Liverpool problems. I suspect they'll cause us 1 or 2, but I still think Liverpool get the job done. So I'm going to go for 3-0. 2-0. I'm going to go 2-0, and there's a massive difference in that. It's not just a 1 goal. I think Liverpool will struggle, actually. I think it'll be 0-0 half-time. We'll struggle to break Wolves down, and there'll be sort of moans of discontent around Anfield. We'll pinch one about the 70th minute, and then we'll maybe nick another one towards the end with Wolves pushing up. Whereas 3-0 feels a completely different game. So, no, I think it's going to be a closer game, but Liverpool get the job done relatively comfortably in the end. 2-0. Now, rounding off this game week is the Sunday 4:30pm kickoff, Spurs against Manchester United from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And this one is almost the battle of 2 very out-of-sorts clubs at the moment, isn't it? Spurs are in a really bad run of form. They are 1 win, just 1 in their last 8 Premier League fixtures. That includes 6 defeats as well in that, so just horrendous time for Spurs fans. Out of both cups now as well recently, with the losses to Villa and Liverpool in the last week, and really only Europe to focus on. For Manchester United, it's bad. 2 defeats in the last 3 Premier League games, but actually it's not that bad. Those 2 defeats against Palace and against Brighton are actually the only 2 defeats United have in their last 9 fixtures in all competitions. And still, the thing that I find most bizarre going into this one is that these 2 teams find themselves in the middle of February sat in 14th and 13th respectively in the Premier League, with their league seasons effectively over. For both of them, their seasons now hinge on what happens in midweek in the European games, and actually the Premier League might become a bit of a distraction the longer the season goes on, as long as they can stay in those cup competitions and, we might actually be looking at the two favourites to win the Europa League this season, looking at, the other teams that are in it, Spurs and Manchester United, and maybe the two teams best placed to challenge for it. What do we think? And for Spurs, at least, that remains their only hope of achieving any sort of European football next season. I mean, bizarrely, if they were to win the Europa League, they'd be in the Champions League next season. And I reckon if you'd have offered that to Spurs fans at the start of the season, a disastrous bottom half Premier League campaign, out of both cup competitions and humiliated by their rivals, but you win a European Cup, I think they'd have taken that. I think they'd have snatched your hand off for it. And now they've got themselves into that position. The pressure's on, isn't it? I mean, Ange, you're going to have to deliver and make good on that promise that you always win something in your second season. But it's going to be a really interesting end to the season for both of these teams. I think Manchester United, they'll find this one difficult. Spurs has always been a tricky hunting ground for Manchester United. They've actually lost 3 out of their last 4 meetings with Spurs. And looking at both sides' recent performances, I don't think there's an awful lot that's going to fill their fans with confidence. I think United were really poor against Leicester in the FA Cup, and look, if not for VAR being disallowed in that round, Leicester probably would have took Man United to penalties. For Spurs, I don't think they pulled up any trees against Aston Villa. I mean, they were losing within the first few minutes, weren't they? They didn't play very well. And normally I'd be saying there's goals in this fixture. And not just because it's Tottenham, Man United, and historically there's been goals in that fixture. And also not because it's a Sunday 4:30, because usually Sunday 4:30 kickoffs, I know you might say the kickoff time doesn't matter. Well, it does. It does tend to change how the game is played a little bit, and actually those games tend to have goals in them. But something tells me that even though defensively these teams are all over the place, I think they're arguably worse in attack. I don't know how Matthijs Tel is going to change that dynamic for Spurs. I really like Kulusevski. Obviously, Son can hurt teams. But Spurs struggle to create. Spurs really struggle to create. And Manchester United, maybe they don't struggle to create, but they can't finish. Xerxes, Højlund, he's been putting Mainu up front. I've just no faith that Manchester United will take many of the chances put in front of them. Spurs, it feels like they don't create enough for their front three because they have trouble kind of getting it through the midfield. There's a big gulf between defence and midfield for obvious reasons, because the defence isn't pushing up quite as high as Postecoglou would like them to, because he doesn't have Van de Ven and Romero. He has young kids back there. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. Personally, I would normally have gone for like a 4-3 or a 4-2 in this one. And I'd probably be leaning towards Spurs. My old man's gone for Spurs winning this one. He's gone 2-0. Again, he's not Man United's biggest fan, so that's unsurprising. He's probably gone with his heart rather than his head on that one. But I think this is going to be a draw. I'm going to go for a bore draw. I'm tempted to go 0-0. No, I'm going to go 1-1. I think it's going to be 1-1. Spurs 1, Manchester United 1 to finish off the game week. Let me know what you think. And don't forget to give the video a like if you can. It's massively helpful. It's hugely appreciated. Give us a subscribe. Share it on other platforms if you can. If you can't, that's fine too. I just appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.